Welcome to Old News, weekly ancient artifacts. I'm Nachliel Sullivan, the museum guy, and in this series we're going to explore connections between ancient artifacts and the weekly Torah reading. Together we'll embark on a journey of discovery, exploring the rich tapestry of history, art, culture, and the universal human experience. And welcome to another episode of Old News. Today we are talking about Parashat Vayera and the Dura Europos Synagogue. Parashat Vayera, just to recap, opens up with Abraham and Sarah's hospitality and the message about their upcoming son Isaac. It goes into the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom ve'Amorah, and then the birth of Isaac, a few other stories in between, the banishing of Ishmael, and finally the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah, or Akedat Yitzchak, and I'll just call it the Akeda to make it easy. The Akeda is depicted on several ancient synagogue floors in the form of a mosaic. The most notable examples of these are the synagogue in Beit Alpha and the synagogue in Tzipori, Sepphoris, which is known to be the city of Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, or Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who redacted the Mishnah somewhere in the beginning of the 3rd century. These synagogues have beautiful mosaic pictures. They include images of the Ark, the Heichal, with menorahs, with other items, as well as other stories. And in the center of them, a zodiac with all of the months of the year, which is a very common motif in many synagogues from this period. But this is basically the late Byzantine period. We're talking about like the 5th to the early 7th century in the land of Israel. But the earliest depiction of the Akeda, and by far the most remarkable one, is the Dura Europos Synagogue on the Euphrates River in Syria. The discovery of the Dura Europos Synagogue was an absolute game changer in the understanding of ancient Jewish history, and I'm going to tell you why. But first of all, a little bit about this discovery. The Dura Europos Synagogue in Syria was discovered by Yale University in the 1930s, and while the original site was unfortunately destroyed by ISIS in 2013, the Dura Europos Synagogue remains intact as it was found in the National Museum of Damascus. Based on Aramaic inscriptions in the synagogue, we can date the construction to the year 244, which means early in the 3rd century, and we know that it was destroyed in the year 255, give or take, because it was filled in with dirt, turning it into a defense of the city against the Sassanian Persian invasion, which is known from the Babylonian Talmud, from the Talmud Bavli, which was written in Sassanian Persian Babylon. The Dura Europos is basically a Pompeii moment, capturing, frozen in time, a moment early in the 3rd century, basically in the very short aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolt, in which Jews were banished from living anywhere near Jerusalem, and synagogues start popping up all over the country, especially in the Galilee, just like the other 2 synagogues we saw. The synagogue at Dura Europos is a game changer because of how it's frozen in time, like a Pompeii moment. Just like the city of Pompeii was covered by the ashes from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, this synagogue was filled in with dirt in order to defend the city against the Sassanian Persian invasion, and that basically captured it in time. What's truly remarkable about the synagogue is beautiful illustrations of dozens and dozens of biblical stories from all over Tanakh, such as Moses the baby being drawn out of the Nile, or Moses splitting the sea, or receiving the Torah. It has stories of the Philistines and the ark destroying the statue of Dagon. It shows the temple in Jerusalem. It shows the anointment of King David. It shows the stories of Mordecai and Queen Esther. It even has the entire story of the Valley of Dry Bones by Ezekiel, where you see God's hand lifting Ezekiel and taking him to the Valley of Dry Bones, and the whole story is animated in a very curious fashion. It has lots of the stories of Elijah and Elisha, Eliyahu and Elisha, the prophets, and the showdown against the prophets of the Baal. There is just so much to see. But at the center of the synagogue, at the niche for the Torah scrolls, the place for the Aron Kodesh, there is a painting of the Akeda. Let's take a close look at this picture. On the left hand, you see a menorah, which is the candelabrum inside the temple. And on the right-hand side, you see the binding of Isaac, the Akeda. There is an altar, there is Abraham, and there is a hand that is coming out of the heavens, so to speak, saying, "Don't touch the kid." This is the earliest example of the Akeda, and notice that it is on the wall that is facing Jerusalem, which means this is the direction that we're praying. This is where the Torah Ark is, and it's one of the oldest decorated synagogues ever found. What is the meaning of all of these beautiful paintings all over the synagogue, and what is the meaning of the Akeda, the binding of Isaac, being in such a central part of the ancient synagogue at Dura Europos? The truth is that it's very hard to answer this, and we may be tempted to do what many have done with some of the synagogues that I mentioned before, is to look at the topics of the different pictures on the synagogue and their arrangement and to give them some sort of interpretation. That's what I like to call a beautiful mind, where we find patterns that aren't really there, but we give them meaning because we feel the need to do so. Or as my professor Stephen Fine calls it, the Robert Langdon phenomena, where people start seeing hidden messages in artwork just like in the Da Vinci Code. It's very easy to fall down this slippery slope, and I want to be very hesitant and not to go there, but I will say the following. So, for example, the Zodiac that is found in different forms, mostly in picture, but sometimes also in text, in many ancient synagogues from the late Byzantine period, tells you that the topic of the calendar was a central concept in whatever it was that Jews were doing in synagogues. And if you go to a synagogue, you know that the concept of time, calendar, dates, months is a central part of what people do in synagogues. And indeed, some of the liturgy, the piyutim from the Byzantine period, correspond with the zodiac in interesting ways, like the prayers for rain. With that in mind, if we look at the central part of the synagogue at Dura Europos, it is possible to suggest that we are facing Jerusalem, and therefore there are pictures that have to do with the temple. So, for example, the menorah, which is very common in all of these synagogues as being right there next to the ark. But the Akeda, the binding of Isaac, has to do with Mount Moriah, which is where the temple was built, and it is the very first story that we have that relates to the Temple Mount. There is a beautiful song about the Akeda, Ha'oked v'ha'ne'ekad v'hamizbeach, the binder, the bound, and the altar. I don't think they were singing that in Dura Europos, but maybe they even had songs about that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you in the next one.